Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Just across the street from the Capitol in Tallahassee is the Leon County Courthouse. And for 2 days last week, a grand jury in that building heard testimony in a case that could prove to be one of the biggest political scandals in the state's history. A scandal that may well define Ron DeSantis' tenure as governor. A scandal that appears to have already derailed the political ambitions of his wife, First Lady Casey DeSantis. And a scandal that may still topple one of DeSantis' closest allies, Florida Attorney General James Uthmeier. I'm talking, of course, about the DeSantis administration's decision last year to secretly divert $10 million of taxpayer money from a Medicaid settlement into the Hope Florida Foundation. Money that was then quietly transferred to two other groups before eventually ending up in the bank account of a political action committee DeSantis and the current Attorney General controlled. The Republican lawmaker who helped uncover the $10 million diversion has already called what happened money laundering and wire fraud, claims DeSantis and Uthmeier deny. But what began as a series of committee hearings in the Florida House at the start of the year to determine what happened to the $10 million soon grew into a formal criminal investigation by the Leon County State Attorney in April. And that in turn has now blossomed into a full-blown grand jury probe. Leon County State Attorney Jack Campbell has refused to comment on the proceedings. Luckily for us, the two reporters who have been working this story tirelessly, the Miami Herald's Alexandra Glorioso and Tampa Bay Times' Lawrence Mower, staked out the courthouse last week.
Yeah, we've seen three people go into the grand jury. One of them was Representative Alexandra. He's a Republican lawmaker who's been investigating the whole Hope Florida Foundation saga. And he confirmed that he spent about 2 hours with the grand jury. We saw Joshua Hay, who until recently was the head of the Hope Florida Foundation, the board at least. He would not talk to us, but we saw him leaving the courthouse on Wednesday. And also Amy Ronshausen. Amy leads an organization called Save Our Society from Drugs. And the Hope Florida Foundation gave this organization $5 million of the $10 million that came from the Centene Medicaid settlement. And she wouldn't talk to us either, but we saw her going in and out with a lawyer.
And Alexandra, I think just for the public to understand, reporters, we understand this, grand jury proceedings themselves are secret, but that doesn't mean that you can't be outside the grand jury room where they're meeting and see who comes and goes. This is something that reporters have done for years in both state courts and federal courts. And so this is not uncommon, nor is it improper for instance, Representative Andrade to acknowledge that he appeared before the grand jury. Witnesses are not sworn to secrecy, only the grand jurors themselves are, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and to clarify, Representative Andrade wouldn't tell us the substance of his testimony. He only confirmed that he was there to testify. And we didn't see people going in and out of the literal courtroom, which is why we were staking out the courthouse, trying to catch them as they were entering. It seemed as though the state prosecutors went to great lengths to keep them from public eye as much as possible.
So when you say you've seen three individuals come in and out of the courthouse, it could actually be more, that they were able to get in through back doors, side doors, and other ways to try to get in and out of the building. That wouldn't be unusual, for instance.
We're fairly certain there were several more people who testified over those 2 days, but correct, these were the three people that we physically witnessed.
In a public space, in a public setting.
Yeah. Again, it's perfectly fine to look to see who comes in and out of a public courthouse. Now, the prosecutor for Leon County is Jack Campbell. He's a Democrat, but he's said nothing about this so far. Is that correct? He's not released any information as to whether or not there even is a grand jury. He's only acknowledged that they are conducting an investigation with regard to Hope Florida. Is that accurate?
That's right. We saw Prosecutor Campbell walk out of the courtroom and he gave a no comment. He didn't deny that what they were doing there, and there was a sign outside of the room stating that there was a grand jury in session. But he has not acknowledged the substance of the grand jury's probe.
And I think it's fair to say grand juries have many options in front of them. Grand juries can be used for many different things. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because there's a grand jury been impaneled that it will result in criminal charges. They have a wide range of things. They could just simply be using a grand jury to gather information. Lawrence, talk to me a little bit about what a grand jury's role is in cases like this. Just generally speaking, what are the range of possibilities they could be involved with right now?
Well, this is a proceeding that is led by a prosecutor, okay? So these are, grand juries can be easily manipulated by a prosecutor because there's no defense being heard of a potential subject of the investigation. But a grand jury can choose to indict someone. They can choose not to indict someone. Or they could, we've seen statewide grand juries, for example, issue reports on stuff. That's also something they can do. That's probably, it's a very unusual thing, but, we've seen numerous statewide grand juries issue reports about election fraud, and there's been at least 2 on election fraud and on other, major issues. But basically their just job there is to decide to indict someone or not to indict someone. And they're kind of relying on the witness testimony they hear, and the guidance from the prosecutor. I mean, but they do have quite a bit more power than a normal jury. They can ask questions. They can issue subpoenas as well. I mean, they can do all kinds of things beyond what a normal jury can do.
All right, Alexandra, let me put you in the role of a grand juror. What would you, if you had grand jury powers, and I've often wished I had grand jury powers in some of these cases, what would be some of the questions you think they should be asking, they might be asking, the information they might be gathering? What do you think the roadmap is for them?
Well, central to their, assuming they are looking into the $10 million flow of money from a Medicaid settlement to a political committee, every step of that financial transaction can be broken down into other financial transactions. And so the most important thing to gather in my mind would be the wires, the financial wires, the bank statements, any underlying documents, including emails, text messages, any kind of communication related to those financial transactions, because that would definitively show whether that money did originate from a Medicaid settlement and eventually make its way into the political committee.
So what you're talking about, and Lawrence, I'll ask you to jump in here, is basically there's 2 ways to look at this. First is, let's prove the fact that money traveled from Centene through the state to the foundation, and then from the foundation to these political committees that were lower on the rung. So part of it is just piecing the actual financial transactions, the wire transfers, the request to move money, all of those things. And then the second is the reasoning and rationale behind those transactions, and those would have to be filled in by the individuals who authorized the transactions. Why were you transferring this money? And that gets us back to the question of who they've called, and having the head of the foundation there would explain, because he could potentially explain why the foundation made the decision to move money from their account once it came in to other accounts. Am I saying it accurately?
Yeah, absolutely. And, he was the one who had the ability to wire money. He had access to the account. Joshua Hay, we're talking about. Amy Ronshausen was the recipient of some of that money. Now, what does she know? What was she told? The day after she gets the money, she starts transferring it to secure Florida, or to keep Florida clean, which is the political committee controlled by James Uthmeyer. What was she told? She has said that James Uthmeyer did not tell her where to send the money, but how did she decide to send it there? Was she in contact with someone else? We know that the lawyer for the foundation, Jeff Aaron, who is very close politically to DeSantis and James Uthmeyer, was speaking with her, was communicating with her, texting with her. We know James Uthmeyer was also texting with her, around the same time. They had a phone call together. There's a lot of records here. Other questions I would have: who came up with this idea? Who directed this? Who came up with the idea to transfer $10 million and route it this way? Did anyone come up with it? Was it something that was piecemeal? Does it developed along the way? Probably doesn't look that way, but maybe there's an explanation.
Well,
the
you
other
could even
obvious
take it.
question
You
is,
you could even take it a step earlier. Whose idea was it to take $10 million that Centene theoretically owed the state for overbilling on Medicaid and give 10 million of that to the foundation to begin with? Because I think your reporting and the general testimony that has come out is that this wasn't Centene's idea. Like, Centene didn't on their own say, you know what, we'd like to throw a sweetener of $10 million and send it to the First Lady of Florida's favorite idea. This came from somewhere inside the Capitol for this $10 million. And that would be the question too, is whose idea was it? So will we see potentially Centene executives? Alexandra, do you think we might see some Centene executives appearing before the grand jury?
It's certainly possible. I mean, we've reported that Centene tried to distance itself from the ultimate Medicaid settlement, which was done in a rushed format last September, just weeks before Floridians started to vote in the election, after the agreement had been dormant for years, since 2021. So it was in September that the diversion of $10 million from the $67 million Medicaid settlement was inserted into that agreement. And Centene's lawyers tried to distance themselves from it, as did the Attorney General's office. And so we know that lawyers in the state agency for healthcare administration were involved with this. We know that, the Department of Children and Families was involved with this. But were these people acting on their own, or were they taking direction from their boss, who is ultimately the governor of Florida?
What are the potential crimes that they could be examining in a case like this, since it does involve a criminal grand jury?
Well, in May, this wasn't related to a state investigation, but in May, we interviewed four former federal prosecutors who told us about 8 different potential crimes, many of which stemmed from the fact that this money originated from a Medicaid settlement. And so if this was Medicaid money, it is owed to state and federal taxpayers. And if it was moved through the Hope Florida Foundation, the prosecutors told us that could be a money laundering crime under federal law, but there's also a money laundering state law. So that could potentially mirror what we had been reporting at the federal level. There are a lot of state statutes that mirror federal law. Another law that could be at stake is official misconduct, or, use of fraudulent funds.
Yeah, I mean, the House Republican lawmaker who's been investigating this has accused them of wire fraud and money laundering. I mean, there's when you look at the requirements for wire fraud, it's like electronic communications and electronic transfers and stuff. Those records are already exist. We have copies of all that stuff. We know where the money went. We know that there are text messages relating to where the money went. And so there's, these kind of charges do exist on the state level, and they could be, potentially used here to look into this.
This is obviously something we will continue to follow. When we come back, we speak to State Senator Lori Berman about property taxes and homeowners insurance. Stay with us. Welcome back. This year, the Florida legislature is expected to focus on property taxes, with the goal of placing something on the ballot next year. What that may look like is still being worked out. But this week, I spoke to the Democratic leader of the Florida Senate, Lori Berman.
I think that the property tax issues that have been proposed are a distraction from the real issue, which is affordability for Floridians. I mean, they're talking about lowering property taxes, and certainly, there are things that can be done to lower property taxes. But when you start talking about eliminating property taxes, you're actually reducing services for the people who live in those homes? Who's going to pay for the garbage collection? Who's going to pay for the infrastructure, our roads and our bridges? Who's going to make sure that the firefighters can come to your house in a short period of time instead of, you know, coming, if you need them, are they going to be there in 5 minutes or are they going to be there in a half an hour? So when you're talking about putting money in somebody's pocket because you're reducing property taxes, if you are actually reducing the services that the individual gets, is that a trade-off that people want to vote for? But what I think that could be a trade-off that people really will want to vote for is making some changes to our property insurance. Right now, we are the second highest in the nation. We pay more than twice as much as the rest of the nation for our property insurance. The average is something like $2,400 in the nation, $5,600 in Florida. And I venture to guess that most of the people in the South Florida area are paying even a significant amount more than that. If we can lower property insurance and put the focus there, that will put more money into people's pockets instead of property taxes.
The governor seems to be trying to create the perception, both through his efforts with DOGE and the chief financial officer's efforts of going around and lambasting various counties, claiming that they are rife with wasteful spending, that you can cut property taxes significantly and have no real impact on service. Do you believe that's a possibility?
I do not believe that that's a possibility. First off, you know, this DOGE program that they're doing, I haven't seen any evidence that there's fraud or cronyism. There may be some waste in local governments, but I don't think there's nearly the amount of waste to make up for the property tax issue. And it's really interesting because I think actually where the waste and the fraud and the cronyism might be taking place are actually on the state level. You know, we have a $116 billion budget. Who's doging our budget? Who's looking to make sure that all that money is being spent properly? And we know, we've seen abuses. We've seen $250 million to build an Everglades detention center that was done with no bid contracts. We've seen $10 million go to Hope, Florida from our taxpayer dollars and then go into political campaigns. We have $30 million from crisis pregnancy centers where it is not required that they have a doctor on staff or anybody medical on staff. We have $4 billion going into vouchers, and yet what kind of accountability do we have for that money? We've heard that there's millions of dollars of duplicate payments in that. So if you want to doge something, and I wouldn't do it, I would doge our federal government. And I have to tell you, I wouldn't do it to affect property taxes. I'd doge it and give people a refund. Why don't we just give people of Florida a refund?
I think two ideas that I've heard circulated, I'm curious as to your reaction on them, is to, one, maybe give a homestead exemption or increase the amount of exemption that first-time home buyers get to try to give them greater entry into the housing market to be able to afford to buy homes. And second, maybe doing more for seniors to maybe increase the types of exemptions that seniors have in Florida, particularly those on limited or fixed incomes. Do you think that there is a way through this that we're likely to see that's more of a targeted basis as opposed to just a broad, you know, we're going to eliminate property taxes for all homesteaded properties?
I absolutely agree with you. I do support some targeted bases, and those are the two areas that I would focus on. First-time home buyers, absolutely. And we're working on a bill in the legislature. It's still an idea in progress for first-time home buyers to take the, not for them not to have to pay documentary stamps tax. So that wouldn't even affect our property taxes. But it's another way for us to be able to give a break to first-time home buyers. And with regards to seniors, absolutely. I'm so concerned that we're pricing our seniors out of their homes right now, especially with all the condo assessments that they've had and the property insurance. So yes, I would consider absolutely doing something for seniors. I think it needs to be needs-based. I don't think it should be an across the board. Once you turn 65, you get a break. We don't want millionaires and billionaires getting, breaks when we need to have, we're a state with no income tax. We need to have money for this state to be able to function. So I do believe that we should focus, and I have no problem with us definitely taking a surgical approach to property tax reform, but not the broad-based way you've seen the governor and the House in their proposals.
All right, so let's turn to the issue that I think you want to try to focus on this coming year in the legislature, which is dealing with property insurance rates. Now, Senator, the legislature has dealt with property insurance issues for years now. I guess what I'm saying is, what's left really to be done at this point that hasn't been tried or attempted?
Thank you for that question. And we know if there was one simple answer, it would have been done already. But what we did, the Elite 11, the Florida senators, we all looked into this and we all filed various bills that address property insurance. And 3 years ago, we did a bill that had to do with prohibiting lawyers from bringing certain lawsuits or putting, not prohibiting, but putting a pretty significant impediment in it. And at that time, they said, this is going to lower property insurance. You'll see. Well, guess what? Property insurance might be flat, but it isn't lowered. As I said before, we are paying the second highest rates in the country. So we have a lot of proposals that, when taken together, I think if we put some of these into effect, they're going to start to lower property insurance. I'll give you an example of a few. One of them is to actually put a cap on the amount of increase that you can have for property insurance. And we're working with the Office of Insurance Regulation to do that. One of the proposals is that if you feel that your roof is still a high functioning roof, you can ask the company to do an inspection. And if they come up with the fact that your roof still has 5 years left, they have to allow you to be insured, and they have to pay for that inspection since they were the ones who required it. Another proposal that I've done for 3 years that I haven't gotten any response to is to create a council of all the interested people, the insurers, the reinsurers, the trial lawyers, the consumers, the consumer advocates, and give us suggestions. We did it in 2008, and we took some of their suggestions. Obviously, we as the legislators don't have all the answers. Let's get input from other people who have answers. We have just, one of the other suggestions was to put a tax break on if no taxes on if you put new windows in, if you put a new roof in, if you put a new garage door in, if these are things that will lower your property insurance costs. So we have a lot of ideas. There's no one simple solution, but I think our ideas combined could help lower property insurance.
We'll be right back after this break. Well, that's all the time we have today. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. Oh, how I do enjoy hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.